So, a quick overview, I've pulled up my teaching portfolio and my student artwork for elementary students. And one of the first lessons and my favorite lessons that I do with students is actually using chalk pastels. So this is actually a first grade self-portrait example. And this is using chalk pastels, Elmer's glue, and black paper. So all you have to do is use black construction paper. You have them draw a self-portrait in pencil, and then they trace the pencil lines with Elmer's glue. And when Elmer's glue dries, as long as it's not too thick, it dries clear. So the cool thing about that is that it's a raised texture. So imagine how dried glue feels. And so now the students can start to fill in those spots with alternating colors or whatever color they need to for their picture. So that's one really nice art medium that I think you should use. The one thing, like I'll say in the later, is that the chalk can be some kids have allergic reactions to chalk. This example is using temper paint. Again, temper paint here for third grade. This is a watercolor. And this is second grade temper paint. So a lot of the work the kids need to do is, a lot of it is planning before you give them the paint. They need to plan with pencil, and then they need to trace. You can see here, the student traced with black Sharpie, because the black Sharpie is going to allow the students to know where they need to paint and not paint. Otherwise, they can go crazy with the paint and just paint all over everything. So it helps them with being very controlled. And this was a group project that students did. And we were dealing with the idea of racism, and the kids actually built this outside on the bulletin board. So they worked as a group to create this. The kids actually laid down and traced each other in that position, and then glued this to the wall. Photo collage here, some example, and this is charcoal examples of how you can use charcoal. And this is ceramics. And this can be done at any grade level, is something called photogram, or you can buy these, they're called like, what are they called? Sun printing. And so all you have to do, you can get this, actually, I bought some last week at the gingerbread house, and it's blue paper that is light sensitive, and you place objects on top of it and then expose it to the sun and put it in water, and it's like photography. And you can create a photogram like this. So this could be done for any grade level. This one was really cool because it's actually, they did a collage using tissue paper collage. So you all have a pack of tissue paper. This is something you could consider for one of your lesson plans. Tissue paper collage, creating an abstract landscape with that tissue paper. Okay, and the way you can collage it is using watered down glue, like Elmer's glue, or you could use Mod Podge, or you can use matte medium. Mod Podge does smell very strong. Matte medium is expensive. Watered down glue is cheap. So and then afterwards, you can see that the student went in and did some sewing. Do you see that? And we learned about sewing patterns. And they just sewed along the line. They chose embroidery thread and were able to sew on that texture there. It's really nice. This is an Eric Carle example. We did this in Module 1. So this is an example of a first grader, and the text was printed. And here is the example of how their work looked. Here is a story quilt of Faith Ringgold, if you want to look at Faith Ringgold's work. And more stitching from third graders. And this is an installation with Sandy Skoglund. So the kids actually did paper mache, and then they designed this room and actually did photographs inside of that room. Here are the paper mache eyeballs that my fourth graders made. And there's an example of my kids each holding their own eyeball. This is more of the pastel. This is an architecture lesson and this is really good if you're wanting to learn about shapes. This is an architectural lesson where you can learn about shapes and then create their own houses. This is my students, kindergarten students, working on easels using a painted background and then painting a silhouetted figure on top using the artist Basquiat as an example. And here is a collage that my third graders made. This was actually their own idea. They decided to do a map and then do an example of everybody of where they're from. And these are the maps they created. And then here is the artwork that they created that relates to where they were born. This is the India ink drawing, and which is not waterproof. You have to be very careful. And they actually used real pens, like the kind you dip in ink for that project. They really enjoyed that. Mask making as well was using ceramic. So this is a really nice opportunity to use ceramic. This group made scorpions. Hi friends, so I've decided to walk you through my art classroom to give you a little idea of art media and the variety of media that you can use for making art. Now, I currently teach at the high school, but I've taught at the elementary level as well. And so I kind of wanted to walk through my classroom, give you a setup. This is my setup for online learning right now. I have a touchscreen television here where I get to teach from. Up above here, I have one of my sample artworks, which is about 40 inches long. This is a good example of using multiple art media, which you might want to call mixed media. In here, I've used acrylic paint. The reason I used acrylic paint for the painting on the canvas, I used acrylic on the canvas, is because it dried really fast and I liked the texture that it created, and I could quickly create this. If I were to use oil paint, it would be a problem because it would take so long to dry. I did this piece in response to the Parklands school shooting and the 17 people who died in that. And so I used a model and I photographed my model and then I collaged. And I'm going to show you here, this is a photo collage on top of an acrylic painting. And then I used a collage of actual physical ribbon. You can see here that I used ribbon. And then I use small photographs of 17 characters along that ribbon. So this uses multiple mixed media. It uses fabric, which is in the ribbon. It uses acrylic paint, and it uses photo collage, which has been applied onto a canvas. And I've also added a wood frame around the edge. If you come over to other parts of my classroom, you can see that some of my students have made large-scale sculptures. And the cool thing about these sculptures is mostly made out of cardboard. So it could be very simple materials that you're working with or more expensive materials. If we were to go inside this cabinet, I have a full set of iPads. iPads is something that you could work with, and it would be considered digital media. Up here is another painting that I did. It's actually a self-portrait, and I did photo collage on here too, but this is actually using oil paint. So this took a few months to make, whereas the other picture, the one over here, it only took me an evening to make because oil paints take a lot longer to dry. Okay, also in my room, you can see I have an example over here, a progression of oil painting. Oil painting can go all the way from an underpainting, the multiple layers, until you get to your final picture. This was the photograph that I used as a reference. Let's see. These are just examples I have in the room. And then inside of my cabinets is where you're going to be finding the tempera paints and the acrylic paints. Now, the nice thing about tempera paints, washable. So with your young students, you're going to be wanting to use washable tempera paint. Now, if you want to be able to seal your tempera paint, you can do a clear coat on top of it. I use maybe a matte medium or Mod Podge to seal it up, because washable tempera, if you get it wet, it can change over time. On the other hand, if you get something called acrylic, it will not change if you add water to it. So it's more permanent, but also is more permanent on your clothes. So you have to be very careful and very selective if you ever let your students work with acrylic. I highly suggest you do not, unless you want some angry parents. This is something I've used a lot too. It's waterproof India ink. It's really neat. I've used it with 4th grade. I wouldn't use it much younger, but for your own purposes, India ink is really neat to work with. But yes, another thing that is permanent. All right, let's look at some other media. We have some sculptural media over here. This is flour. Does anyone know what you use flour for? I use flour for paper mache. It's really simple. All you do is add water to it and dip in paper towels. I like using paper towels rather than newspaper. You can use newspaper. The only problem with newspaper is it has print on it, whereas paper towels don't have any print on it. So when it dries, it's mostly white, which makes it really easy to be able to paint on top of. Inside of here, I have wire, which you can do for wire sculptures. And I also have shave cream, which you'll find for pre-K through 3rd grade. They love to clean their tables with shaving cream. It's a lot of fun. So you just spray shaving cream all over the table, and then you can have them wipe up the tables that way. Another reason you can use shave cream is you can see there's some marbling tutorials online, and that might be fun for you to do for printmaking and marbling. All right, my watercolors. The best thing you can do for watercolors is using praying. Do not use anything like Crayola. I promise you, you will regret it. It does not have the same quality. But the prayings are really nice because it has all the primary and secondary colors, as well as black and brown. And conveniently, it comes with a nice brush that you can work with. And you can store it in their own tubs at school, which is really nice. The only problem with these is I do not believe they are washable. So you do have to make sure they're wearing something that is easy for them to clean up. Or like an art smock. In my classroom, I always had every single student wearing an art smock. Of course, you've got your pastels. You got your markers. But pastels are a lot of fun to work with. The only problem you need to worry about is allergies with chalk. So you would have to be very careful to make sure that none of the students in your class have any allergies with chalk before you work with chalk pastels. Also, one other thing, if you do work with chalk pastels with students, you need to make sure you teach them not to blow. That's one thing I learned the hard way. Once you work here with chalk for a while, it starts to get a lot of excess chalk on there. You can see it creates quite a mess with your fingers. And one of the tendencies is after they've moved it around or anything like that is to blow on it. And then that can create dust all over somebody else. So you have to be very careful with that. But usually chalk pastels does clean up kind of nicely. And when I work with chalk pastels, instead of using the fingers to blend, you can use a paper towel to do any kind of blending there. All right, let's take a look if there's anything else in here that I wanted to share with you. There's something here called printmaking ink. I didn't ask you to buy any printmaking ink for this course. If we were in person and doing tutorials in person, I would have had you do this. But you can get this at like Hobby Lobby or anything like that. It's called Speedball block printing ink. And this is, it feels like paint, but it's sticky. And so it will stick to any surface that you put it to. So if you want to do any kind of stamping or designing that way and rolling on the ink before you put it onto the paper, then printmaking ink is really good to have. So that's something to look into for your own classroom and consider. You can do for these projects if you want to, if you purchase it on your own. I did not make it required because these can be a good like $4 each. Just getting black should be just fine for you. Obviously, when you're working with the supplies, you want to make sure you have glue all. I prefer the non-washable. The washable is way too thin and very flimsy. Maybe it will work really well for your younger ones, but this one is a lot stronger. So just the glue all. And then you're going to need plenty of glue sticks, which you'll see very quickly you will use a lot of glue sticks. So you're going to want to make sure you keep a lot on hand. Now, when it comes to the paper media, I'll give you some tips from experience, is that painting on any type of construction paper is very difficult because the construction paper pills and it falls apart. Pills means when it like starts to come apart. If you want to watercolor with integrity, using watercolor paper is advisable. I just purchased a huge stack of watercolor paper. You want to get at least 90-pound paper if you're going to be doing watercolor. One side, you're going to see a lot of texture on this watercolor, and it will absorb a lot of water. You want it to have be able to absorb a lot of water. It will not pill and fall apart. The cheaper the watercolor paper you get, the worse off you're going to be. So it's actually beneficial to work small and to have good watercolor paper for your students. I love this stuff right here. It's called mixed media. So this is, I spend a lot of money on this every year for my students because it is great because it's nice and thick, kind of like cardstock, but it's really nice because look what it has, wet and dry media. So you can do any type of chalk pastels, oil pastels, or just pencil drawing on here, but you can also do painting on here. And so this is a great all-around paper if you want to do a nice art project with your students. You are also free to use nice paper on your own. I did not require it of you for this class because I didn't want you spending that much money. I wanted you to experiment with the papers that you do have. If we look over here, I can show you how in my photography class we do things like printing out photographs and then we sew on top of it. So having needle and thread is very useful. I have needles that are really large and very soft. There's even plastic needles for students as well. But this is just embroidery type of thread that you can buy. It's not too expensive and you get the colors that you want, but kids really enjoy working with needle and thread. So that's an example there. Of course, you can always do traditional photography. I do photography that is using digital photography because it's a lot easier and print out. One thing you're going to really want is access to a printer as much as possible for doing photo collage. A lot of my students really enjoy doing photo collage. So this is just, obviously a very brief overview of some of the media that I have in my classroom. I did forget to show you, I do have a whole clay area over here. And some advice working with clay. If you do, the students love it. Obviously, you're going to want to wear a smock for that. It's nice to have, if you're working with it, something for them to work on top of, like a piece of canvas, so that it does not stick to the table. That is one of the things that will happen with students working with clay. It will stick to the table. If we were doing in person, you and I would be doing some clay together. One thing about the clay that you purchase, there is something that is called like a terracotta color clay, which is a dark brownish red. And then there's also this gray color right here, which actually ends up, once you fire it, it ends up looking white. So as you can imagine, if the clay is white, then it's really easy to paint or to glaze on top of, and the colors will pop. See, here's some examples here. And here's some examples with the glaze on it. Let me see if I have any terracotta examples. We've been using a lot of the gray. The only problem with the gray is it's not as strong. So actually the terracotta works really well with young fingers because it's very forgiving. So the problem with terracotta is that, sorry, I don't have any examples here today. The terracotta is that you won't be able to paint over it very easily because the terracotta color will come through. Okay, I just found a piece of terracotta clay. This is a wind chime made by a student. And as you can see, they tried to paint the blue over top of it, but much of that terracotta color still showed up. So you would have had to put a lot of layers of the blue on top to cover it up. And on the inside where it hasn't been covered, you can see there's the terracotta color that shows up. However, it's more forgiving and the students will be more successful typically with a clay body like that. So every classroom needs to have a junk classroom where you've got miscellaneous things in store for you. Aluminum foil is really nice to have around because you can easily make a sculpture out of aluminum foil. Really simple to do. Here you can see I've got beads. Kids love working with beads, even if they're just gluing it on and not actually stringing anything through it. So getting some of these at the dollar store is really good to have on hand because it makes great for eyes or anything like that. Now glitter, there's a love-hate relationship with glitter. I keep it because there have been times where I found that it's appropriate to use glitter. And typically it's when we're doing like mask making or anything like that where we do need to have a lot of shine into their work. You just have to be very very particular about how you distribute the glitter because it will get out of hand. And also I think that a lot of educators can rely on it too much. I used it for about 1 or 2 projects throughout my school year. And as a teacher, you're going to learn that people will donate stuff to you all the time. So I had a bunch of these donated. You need to have a nice cabinet where you can take free stuff that you get from people so that you can use them. Obviously, this is a must-have in any kind of elementary classroom or early elementary classroom, obviously because these can turn into puppets, but also because when you're taking art projects home, you can have them decorate the outside of it for whoever they're taking the art project home for, and then stuff the art project inside of it. So having brown bags is a really good idea. Some other things you can see I have over here is like a skull. Having cool objects for kids to want to draw, like on some downtime. Let's say they finish their work early. You could just place some really interesting objects that the kids find and have them draw and like really see what they're drawing. Even one thing that kids really like is like a fish tank and drawing the fish that they see. I did want to show you this example here is a paper mache example. All this was using is some screen that you get for like window screen. And then it was hammered onto this board. And then it was paper mached and then it was colored. So you can create an abstract art just like that. Kids love paper mache. Hopefully we'll be doing a project like that soon. Oh, and here's an example of the needles. Right here. Like I said, these plastic needles are huge. Look how big they are. They have a really large eye, so it's easy for them to thread. And this tip does not hurt. I do have some that are a little bit sharper in metal, which would be fine for anyone like 2nd or 3rd grade. Okay, I think I've covered everything in, oh yeah, here's the embroidery. All I have, this was donated to me too. Look at all that embroidery thread. Accept your donations and accept them nicely. All right, that's all I have for right now. Let's go on and learn about other art media.